Bonsoir, je suis Fabienne Hara, je suis la directrice générale adjointe du Forum de Paris sur la paix. Je suis absolument ravie d'être ici ce soir et d'avoir pu organiser en collaboration avec Sciences Po Psya cette session sur l'intelligence artificielle à l'occasion de la Journée internationale des femmes, le 8 mars. Merci beaucoup, merci pour l'hospitalité et la collaboration très efficace et fructueuse. Comme vous le savez, le Forum de Paris travaille sur la gouvernance globale, sur l'émergence de nouvelles normes de régulation, et c'est aussi une plateforme de dialogue et d'action nord-sud qui donne beaucoup la priorité à des initiatives politiques, des coalitions et des projets en rapport avec son mandat. Et il y a deux domaines en particulier que je veux mentionner ce soir et sur lesquels on travaille. Le premier domaine, c'est qu'on accueille et on essaye de réfléchir à la régulation des technologies émergentes. On a produit déjà un rapport sur l'intelligence artificielle par un groupe d'experts qui était majoritairement de pays du Sud, qui s'intéresse à la gouvernance de l'intelligence artificielle en avril 2022. On a bien entendu eu beaucoup de sessions au Forum de Paris, à l'événement annuel en novembre sur l'intelligence artificielle, séances auxquelles je crois que Gabriel Ramos a participé, Anne Bouverot aussi, Nicolas également. Un des projets de Monsieur Mia a été sélectionné, ou même deux projets, je crois qu'on a dit tout à l'heure au forum. Et voilà, et peut-être, j'espère en tout cas que la vision que nous avons de l'IA, qui est l'IA comme un bien public, sera discutée ce soir et certainement aussi dans les préparations du sommet que le président Macron a appelé de ses vœux et qui aura lieu soit à la fin de l'année, donc soit au début de l'année 2025, et auquel nous allons contribuer en tant que Forum de Paris. Et juste le deuxième domaine, très vite, c'est l'égalité des genres. Là aussi, nous avons au Forum de Paris beaucoup et de manière constante accueilli des sessions, travaillé sur la diplomatie féministe, sur la finance féministe, sur les diverses coalitions qui travaillent sur l'égalité des genres, qui promeuvent cet agenda. Voilà, donc merci beaucoup de nous accueillir et bonne discussion, bon débat.
Thank you very much, Fabienne. Thank you to the Paris Peace Forum for being a partner in this endeavor. We are going to be discussing this afternoon in the context of International Women's Day 2024, the intersection between artificial intelligence, generative AI in particular, and gender equality. We know the opportunities that generative AI can generate for advancing international public policy making, whether it's on healthcare, whether it's on education. We know a little bit about generative AI and education in Sciences Po. We know that it's changing, it's reshaping the world of work. But we also know, and this is what we want to unpack this afternoon with a great panel of speakers, we want to look at the difficulties, the challenges that artificial intelligence poses, transposing gender inequalities, discriminations from the analog to the digital, to the AI world. So what we want to do is unpack what is the reason for that, what's causing it, what can be done from an ethical point of view, from an entrepreneurial point of view, from a legal point of view, in order to build more ethical frameworks that reduce rather than enhance discrimination. So that's the challenge for this afternoon. We are going to engage in a conversation with three great speakers. We lost the fourth one, Rafael Senidis. She lost her voice, so we didn't think that it was very useful to have her sit if she couldn't talk. So we will have her with us on our next occasion. She apologizes for that. But we have a great panel with whom we will try to unpack all these different dimensions. Let me start, and we jump straight ahead with Anne Bouverot. She's the president of the board of the École normale supérieure and École normale super, but she's also the co-chair of the committee set up by the French Prime Minister on artificial intelligence. So straight to the point, Anne, and we'll start with you. Artificial intelligence is not a new term. It exists since the 50s, at least, of the previous century, that is. But tell us a little bit, what evolution have we seen in this linkage between artificial intelligence and gender equality? What's this road that has been transited, and what should we look at today?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to speak here. Thank you so much on a very important subject, on the intersection of two very important subjects, AI and gender equality. So yes, AI exists since the 1950s. The term was coined, I think, in 1956 by John McCarthy from Dartmouth College. If you look at the pictures of the groups of researchers that worked on AI at the time, not very many women, that's for sure. However, we should remember that in terms of computer science in general, there was a time where actually programming was even considered to be a particularly an activity particularly suited to women. There's even a time when there were advertisings in women's magazines saying we're looking for people who have a great attention to detail, who can follow instructions and make sure that they deliver something that has a high quality. And this is really typically skills that women have. So those are jobs for women, and women program the ENIAC computer and big enterprises like this. So stereotypes have worked in one direction and the other over the years. I studied AI, and I have a PhD in AI from not the 1950s, but the last century. And there weren't many girls and women studying computer science and math and AI, but actually there's even less today if you look at the statistics. So this is a subject that has not been improving, and we'll discuss it more, and I don't want to speak too long because we'll come back to this, but this is a subject that suffers from this image that it's going to be a boys' band in a garage, and you're going to have to work 24 hours a day, and you're going to be in a T-shirt that will not have been washed for a long time, and those are all stereotypes. But of course, that's not super attractive to girls and women. So one of the ways, I think, and we'll come back to this, to make this more attractive for girls and women and for more people in general that don't identify with this stereotype, is to discuss about the outcomes and the use cases. Because clearly AI can be super helpful in health, in education, in lots of areas that are very beneficial for humanity. And I think everyone should be motivated to come and work on this. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Anne. Let me first thank the virtual audience that is following us live on Zoom. We will have an opportunity also at the end of these interventions for questions and answers. So for those watching online, please give us a signal if you want to take the floor. Let me move to Gabriela Ramos, who is Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences in UNESCO, and someone that has taken upon herself and the UNESCO family to work for more ethical frameworks for artificial intelligence. So, Gabriela, how can these ethical frameworks help us mitigate gender inequalities? How to do that, in particular, bearing in mind that there is another fracture within the gender inequality, which is the North-South fracture also?
Well, thank you so much. It's so great to be with you. If you go to a conference and you have, of course, Nicola and Anne and Arantxa, you are with the usual suspects. So it's great to be with you. The fact is that the technology has been advancing at a very fast pace and has been understood as the technological revolution. The ethical framework helps you to frame it as a societal transformation. And I think this is what changes the issue. Because if you go for trying to control what Anne was saying in terms of the technology is just reproducing the biases that we have in the real world, women underrepresentation in the data, therefore data outcomes will always be biased. Women underrepresented in the sector, no, women underrepresented in the ICT, women underrepresented, lack of diversity, lack of accountability. This is what we have now. Therefore, then if you go and try to chase the algorithms or try to see how you frame the black box, or you get nowhere, because that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is actually to think about how much we need to influence the way these things are done, looking at the outcomes. And therefore, when you see in the outcomes that, for example, in this report that I brought to you, the weight of words, it's proven that the job posting in LinkedIn, the way they are presented, let less women to apply for those jobs. It's just normal that many times you are not attracted by the way the things are framed. And therefore, the solution from the ethical point of view is exactly to look at how do we build the technologies in a more diverse way, teams. How do we ensure that if there are aggression against women, because we just launched a report and it's a fact that women are more aggressed in the cyberspace than men, how do you put the decisions that you need to have for this not to happen? How do you ensure, for example, that girls are more attracted to these disciplines? Because one thing is that they are not represented now in the sector. You said it, 20% of women in the sector, top level, very, very low. But at the end, if you don't have the pipeline, because only 0.5% of women choose to go to ICT, less than in the engineering world, then there is nothing there. And we are glad because, and this is what I wanted to put at the table, we developed this recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. When I was arriving at UNESCO 3 years ago, I saw the recommendation, fantastic substance, and then I asked, where is the gender chapter? 24 global experts, very well balanced, regionally, diversity, women, no gender chapter. I said, why don't we have a gender chapter? I don't know, because if we talk about discrimination, we're talking about women, so that's fine. I was like, what? And we developed the chapter because the ethical framework, and now that we're working with countries to equip themselves better to frame these technologies, because this is the point, is not the technologies, but us, policymakers and institutions. We have now very concrete policy tools to influence how this sector is moving. Policy tools in terms of affirmative action, policy tools in terms of rules and regulations, in terms of how diverse your teams need to be, budgeting, procurement, favoring startup by women. I mean, all the things that need to be put there because the playing field is very uneven. And therefore, as with all the issues that we do with gender equality, that you need to put these tools, quotas, yes, people don't like quotas, but at the end, the only countries that have advanced into gender equality, they did it through quotas. You design them with care, you design them merit-based, but all these things need to be put together to ensure that we are not just reproducing what we have in the world, in the digital world, which is exactly what is happening, and then we will have a world that is more unequal than anything. I also brought this one. It's just a compendium of all the gaps. And I think we should not repeat the gaps that we have in the real world, in the digital one.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. Let me now turn to Nicolas Millet, founder of the Future Society. We've heard from Gabriela that it's not just the future of technology, but also is the future of all kind of society. So how can we make sure that industry develops this generative AI with built in it this ethical dimension? How can it be ethical by design, so to speak?
Thanks a lot, Arantxa, and great to be back here. A school where I taught, where Mark Maloney years ago was kind and visionary enough to get started this first course on governance of AI, because we saw an opportunity to train a generation of AI governance practitioners. And 5 years on, I can tell you that the opportunities have grown, have exploded. There are so many careers that you should pursue in that field. As of today, the European AI office, which is being created to implement the EU AI Act, is recruiting to apply. And I begin by that, and I'm trying just to emphasize one key point. The short version of my answer is the law. I have fought for the past 10 years to, in a way, not repel, but minimize the framing of the debate around ethics. It's the conversation we had a month ago, and push it towards more governance. Because I think that, and my fear has always been that, who do we place the responsibility upon when we frame the debate upon ethics? We place it in a way where it belongs, everyone, we all have a responsibility, but we don't honor the topography of power. Do we have the same responsibilities? Does Sam Altman have the same responsibility as you, for example? Probably not. Probably not. And that's why putting and framing the debate around governance enables factoring the topography of power. And because we know that the market incentives, the pressure to deploy these models at scale is huge. And the market incentives are not sufficient to foster safety by design, quality by design, fraternity by design, all these values that we stand for. The market incentives themselves do not suffice. And therefore, we need legislative frameworks. As smart, as flexible, as agile as possible. But let me be clear. Without legal basis, it doesn't work. Exactly as you said, Gabriela. At the end of the day, you can say what you want over our responsibility to do things. If you don't put quotas, not much will happen. And we have gone through a very important moment in our constitution this week. We have decided as French to put the right to abortion into our constitution. And many people said, we don't need that. We need to focus on the processes. Yes, we need to focus too on the means, on the outcomes. But at the end of the day, without a legally binding backstop, not much happens. You need soft and soft, but without the hard part, not much happens. That's valid for AI, let's say ethics by design, trustworthiness by design, whatever you want, because of the pressure. We can come back to that in a minute. But we also need it for the gender part of things, as smart as possible, but for sure.
Great. I'm going to push you in a moment about what that smart legislative approach to gender in AI could look like, because I think that's a very important part of this conversation. But let me, before we do that, go back to Anne. Generative AI is changing the world of work. And in this world of work that is changing, not just blue collars, but more and more also white collars, and this is a totally new conversation. Is AI having the same or a differentiated impact on women?
I think that's a great question. Thank you. I think the first thing about AI and work is there was a very highly publicized report in about 10 years ago in 2013 by Oxford saying, researchers at Oxford saying more than half of the jobs of people would disappear within the next 20 years. So that was only 10 years ago, but we can see that we're not on track to have half of the jobs disappear. We have the lowest ever unemployment in a number of countries right now. And since then, specialists, experts in the subject have uncovered that actually the right way to look at this is not jobs, it's tasks within jobs. And yes, if you look at tasks, it's probably 60%, 70%, maybe even 80% of the white jobs that will have a significant number of tasks that will be impacted. That will change. Some of them will just be automated. Others will just be done differently. And so I think that's the way to approach the impact on jobs. Now, what does that say about gender and about women? So the types of tasks that generative AI will automate or significantly change are typically administrative, repetitive tasks that have to do with working with words and working with images. So that can be in marketing, that can be in legal, that can be in finance, that can be in a number of the creative industries. And of course, women are quite represented in these jobs. So I think, yes, there will be a significant impact in terms of the jobs that are changed on women. If I can just take this one step further in terms of north-south, actually it's the economies with the highest percentage of white-collar jobs in the services field that will be more impacted. So actually some of the economies in the south will be less impacted in general. Now, once I've said that, I haven't finished because there's also jobs that will be very much unimpacted or unchanged, or tasks or parts of jobs that are relationships with people, talking to people, taking care of people, being in more of a public relations or interaction type job, and taking care of young people or the elderly, or those are also jobs where women are overrepresented. So I think on the one hand, you have jobs where, yes, women are more likely to be part of these jobs that will be impacted. And it's super important that we work on training, upskilling, reskilling, and with a particular lens on women. And there's also jobs where actually it's more secure for men and women, but also a number of women will not be impacted there. So it's, as always, I think it's very important to take a lens and dig into the way a change is going to impact society, and take lessons on one side and the other.
Thank you. That was, the unpacking that is so valuable. Let me go back to Gabriela. How do we build these ethical frameworks that are more sensitive to gender considerations? And can we look at an ethical framework for things like algorithms, where there is clearly also an issue of embedded discrimination?
Let me say, Arantxa, as a general comment, the recommendation and the way we frame the shaping of these markets, as I said, it's a social conversation, but it's also a question of what policies, what tools, what incentives you create, what investments you make. So whenever you hear about regulating the algorithms, when I don't know if we are going to do that, I don't think that that's the purpose. The purpose is, if you find that a development of a technology is discriminating against women, you should have the accountability mechanisms. And then you don't need to go with the developers to tell them, okay, so the way you introduce this conceptual framework, or the input that you included was not representative enough. But what you will do is to create incentives, because they know that if they discriminate, there's going to be an action and a consequence. And that's why I agree with Nicola, is a question of policies, is a question of how you equip governments. And as you said at the beginning, and Anne also said it, the increase in possible asymmetry of capacities, of understanding, of developments, not only between the global south and the global north, even between the big tech and the companies in the north also. It's just huge. And therefore, I think this requires a rebalancing. And what are the kind of tools? Is not so complex. I mentioned some of them. But the most important issue is to see how do you embed the gender lenses in all what you put as a solution. And for example, just having a gender chapter in the recommendation signed by 193 countries, they said, oh, we need it. No, don't take it for granted. Not all the people will be thinking that you need to do something special for women, but you need, because the impact is, again, not homogeneous for all the groups, let alone the question of the underrepresentation of women, but also the impact on women and how women can also have more developments that are suited to their own needs. The other part is how in the process of implementing the recommendation, because we included also a very sound process, we love agreements, but we love more to be implemented. We have a readiness assessment methodology, and that makes us super proud, because the readiness assessment has been all the time computer capacity, how many skills, how much investments, how much startups, no? The question is, how equipped are the governments? That's a question. Where are the institutions? We're working with the European Union. Is the divergence in terms of the capacities of governments to understand, to shape, to rule in the development of these technologies is not very high everywhere. But with the readiness assessment methodology that we created, we try to understand where countries are in terms of their capacities to regulate and to frame this technological development. And we always include the gender questions, always. And you will be super proud because we're doing 50 diagnostics all around the world, 50 countries, including Brazil and India and Mexico, to Mali and Malawi and all the countries. And you always have, I want to understand your sector. I want to understand how many women. I want to understand if you have the pipeline. And I think that that's the way you get the diagnostic right. And then you get into these other policies to correct the outcomes. And then we have a fantastic group that will not let us really holding us accountable, the Women for Ethical AI, with Alessandra Sala and a group of fantastic women that are always saying, what are you doing? Where is it? And so they will not let us forget about the gender chapter.
Thank you, Gabriela. Let me go back to Nicola. How do we get all these different stakeholders, whether they are business, whether they are governments, whether they are other actors like academics, researchers, how do we get them to collaborate to build the kind of policy frameworks that you talked about?
It's hard. You seek to operate and take them from where they're at. So, for example, in the industry, instead of talking about stakeholders, let's talk about a value chain, which is a lingo and a set of power balances and imbalances that are well understood. If we want to establish a trust framework as an alternative in some high-risk cases to, let's say, open weighting, open sourcing, this is something that the industrial forces have been tamed to do for the past 50 years. We know how to do that. And we know how to deal with the imbalances of power. For example, in the context of implementing a soft law normative instrument with immense legitimacy, but at times with more difficulty to penetrate from a capacity building perspective into the tissue of government, speak the language, I'll say that with a lot of respect, the language of bureaucracy, and talk about monitoring mechanism, and the RAM and the ethics impact assessment methodology are the right kind of tools to propagate those instruments across government, taking people where they're at and not where we hope or where we think they're at. For better and worse, I think it's very important. And again, one of the reasons why I fought so hard in the context of the EU Act to have a minimum set of rules for foundation models is because with a market of a critical mass of the size of the European Union, we could do things that would have a global impact at the time which was ripe. When Mrs. von der Leyen, in 2019 announced an EU Act, some people laughed. So what are you talking about? We don't need that. 5 years later, we were all, I think, in agreement that some things need to be done. A lot disagreed as to what needed to be done. My view as to what was the techno-scientific underlying cocktail and the political economy was that we needed to put as smart as possible, but a minimum level of pressure on the developers of foundation models because of the black box, high potential, total lack of robustness that their alleged infrastructure piece would carry into society, into the economy. Can we ask the state of Rwanda to do that? No, we can't. I've advised Rwanda, Ghana, and Tunisia. They are too much. Their market size is too little. And they are not integrated. Yes, Smart Africa, yes, the African, yes, there are moves in the right direction. But right now, they are too fragmented. And so if we decide, we let them place the burden on their economy to do that, the investors will run away. It was our responsibility. We knew the Americans wouldn't be able to do it. And we knew that the American companies were extremely interested in getting into our market. And so we had a form of leverage. And the Commission understood that. So it's also taking into consideration that and how that can be done. Understanding and reading the power dynamics and asking and placing the burden and responsibility, as I said before, where it belongs.
So let me push back a little bit on that. Has the EU AI Act taken seriously the issue of gender and its design?
Not sufficiently. But again, the beauty of the rule of law, the beauty of our legal order is that the EU Act is built on a normative pyramid that places the defense or the fight against discrimination at the center of things. Is it sufficient? No, for sure. For sure it's not sufficient. But is it a good base? Yes, I think, because we're building on the shoulders of giants in terms of, I think, discrimination, anti-discrimination, and gender balance. Again, that's my personal view, I see the fight for gender equality as the mother of all battles for equality. Because in this case, we don't have a minority. It's not a minority. So when we have to deal with many other questions which are more complex, this one, come on, we have political consensus, we have democratic majority, come on. That's why I was less preoccupied. I should have been probably more, but I was a tiny bit less preoccupied over that.
Okay. And France is going to host the next AI summit. Previous one was hosted by the UK. There's going to be some form of intermediary step that Korea will undertake. What should France do as regards gender equality for its summit? And I know that I'm asking a risky question so give us your view rather than the official host view.
I was going to say I am not the French government, so I cannot tell you. But I can recommend things, and I can certainly say what I hope. I do think it is important to take gender into account in AI and in other topics, and in particular, when you are convening people for whatever reason for a panel. I mean, everybody now understands this dynamic that a panel constituted only of men or only of women should be an exception. Of course, that can happen. You cannot mandate. But if you have a whole conference over 3 days and you only listen to men, for example, everybody now would say that's wrong. I think it's the same for a summit like this. We need to make sure that the people who work on preparing it and the people who are invited to the summit and its various steps and instances need to be considered from a global perspective. And that means men and women. That also means that it should not be a summit of the US and Europe, for example. It clearly needs to be more inclusive in terms of number of countries. And it's difficult because a lot of the companies, if you look at the business side, 10 of them, 9 are in the US. And then you get maybe there's a couple, 1 or 2 in Europe, maybe 1 in Korea, but if you are not careful, you could end up over-inviting, for example, people in the US. So being inclusive in any type of preparation and convening, I think, is always the right answer. And if I can influence in this direction, I will.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the audience in a moment. For those that are watching online, you cannot take the floor, but you can send questions in writing. So get ready. We will read them and pass them on to the panelists. But Gabriela, what's the next frontier for UNESCO on incorporating gender into AI?
I really think that we are working with governments, and I think that's a core issue. Every time I hear that generative AI has really grown exponentially in its capacity to impact our world, I equate this to the need to increase exponentially the capacities of governments to deal with these technologies, and therefore this is the core. For men and for women, the core issue is how do we avoid the violation of our fundamental rights and freedoms, which we know are happening, were careless developments. And for all that we know, it's a matter of shaping and building a narrative that I think change actually. I think that generative AI was a blessing in disguise, because at the end, it generated so many concerns and answers, and the massive, the deep fakes and the exponential misinformation and democracy, and that leaders got worried. And when leaders got worried, you get the executive order in the US, you get the AI Act passed, and you get a lot of interest. I see we had this global forum on the ethics of AI in Slovenia. We were expecting 20 countries to come to exchange how they are implementing the recommendation, and we got 67. Because now countries are no longer, even though big tech, and those big tech, not all, because we're working very closely with Microsoft and Telefonica and big companies, but those that still consider that you should not regulate because you don't understand, is not the case anymore. What we're hearing is how to. Who has the best practices? Who can tell us how? But for the gender issue, I have to say that this is a double game. Because if we don't change the reality of women in the real world, what are we going to do with the digital world? Of course, we can put all of these incentives, quotas, affirmative action, encourage girls to go for ITC, getting the investment funds not to fund companies that don't have women at the top, all of these things. But we continue in a world that is highly unequal. You still have segmentation, stereotyping, women going for low rewarding sectors, men going for the financial. You still live in a world where girls in Afghanistan cannot go to school. You still live in a world where women are not free. So I feel that yes, let's push for this not to happen in the digital world, but we need to correct it in the real world. I think that we're still I have to say, and that's why I also brought another report. Because, Arantxa, you and I have been talking about these things how long? For decades, since we were...
For decades.
No. Well, for a long time. Not me, I was very young. No, you were very young, very, very advanced for the time. No, we were in the G20. We were looking at how we introduced the gender target in the G20, and I still remember all these Sherpas saying, gender in the G20, that's not for leaders. You remember, it was almost offensive. But the point is that all the countries have made progress in the dual parental leave. Kudos to France on the abortion law, on the question of putting diversity rules for companies, for boards. France is also top on the question of businesses. We know what we need to do. Eliminate stereotypes in textbooks, in the school, all of these things. But we need to change mentalities. We need to change changing mentalities. The whole point is how do you address the cultural and social norms that are still prevailing and that don't allow women to fulfill their full potential, and that probably push also men to get into sometimes toxic masculinities that are neither helpful for them. So it's a systemic issue. Yes, let's do it for digital, but let's do it for the whole economy and society.
I've got a recommendation for you. I hope if he's listening, he doesn't take it nastily, but maybe send this report on mentalities to Elon Musk. Close parenthesis. Of course.
Pablo, who made the report in India.
Okay, send it to him. Nicola.
One thing that worries me vis-a-vis what Anne said before is that, as far as I can see, the political economy of gender and how technology is pushing it is not going to, particularly generative AI, is not most probably going to push it in the right direction. Caring economy as an example. So is the caring economy going to flourish? Probably yes. Are women going to benefit from the rebalancing between labor and capital in generative AI getting into the caring economy? In other words, are people doing the caring going to be paid more? Or is the algorithmic processing underlying those services going to capture the value? That's the big question. That's a big political question. My view right now is that, unfortunately, if we don't do anything, it's going to be in the wrong direction, meaning that these overwhelmingly women are not going to be paid more. They are not. Nurses, people who care. I don't want to put any, because again, those are the stereotypes. But people who care, or predominantly women, are not going to be paid more. And so this labor capital, those tech bros, are going to capture the value. And I say that, and I confess, being the co-founder of an generative AI startup with a co-founding team of 4 men. We know that. I mean, we realize that. We are not blind. And we have, so it's part of the conversations we're having. Everyone has to put their own things on the table. And so we are well aware of that. that there is a lack of rebalancing, and it's not pushing in the right direction, most probably.
Thank you. That was extremely helpful. Let me open the floor for questions, comments, or observations. We're going to take this one, and then the lady over here, and then we'll go to the back.
Okay. Thank you for the fascinating discussion. My name is Shamira Ahmed. I'm a fellow from the European University Institute. And my question's on gender. We know that there are different women, there are different types of women. They're not a monolith. And women, there's limited talk from the discussion on intersectionality. For example, women with disabilities are less disadvantaged in the space and more vulnerable with new technologies such as AI, for example. So how do we address an ethical framework or introduce intersectionality into the discussion?
Thank you. Let's pass we take a few if you agree. All right. Okay.
Hello, I'm Alicia. I'm a student here at Sciences Po in the School of Management and Impact. And first of all, thank you for being here and for this. I'm wondering, since all of the conversation has been based around Europe, around the US, I'm wondering, is this battle transferable to other regions in the world? How is the movement over there with regards to this? And if so, what kind of movement is there? Is it coming from provoked by the EU or even the US, or provoked by the private sector? And how does the fight and the struggle fight with cultural norms or even religions, etc.?
Thank you, and we'll take a third one, and then we'll go to, voilà, s'il vous plaît.
Try again. Hello.
Yes.
My name is Hara. I am a student of PSIA, and currently, as part of my master, I'm working on an AI research project together with the OECD, and we're looking at opportunities and challenges in development projects. And what we have found is, or what we start seeing after interviewing a couple of our contacts, is that essentially the buy-in of the final user of any AI project developed in a development organization is very important. So we can see somehow that, there is a bit of a dichotomy. There is a lot of research on what are the risks, but then what really matters is, okay, are you delivering the product that is important?
Yeah.
So we can say that market and business comes first. So what do you think about it? How do we merge this, in particular in development? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So let me take these three questions. Let's start with Anne, and then we'll move in the direction. You pick the question,
because we don't necessarily all three to respond to three. Let me maybe start with your question. I think you're very right that it starts with the users and acceptability, and there's a number of surveys that show that actually CEOs and government leaders think that this is wonderful. This is a new productivity tool. This is going to unleash a new economic area of economic growth, and it's going to be really great. And then if you take the same survey to workers in organizations, they're less enthusiastic because they actually fear that it will change their jobs, that they don't really know how it will come, and they're worried. And I think that's a fundamental issue that we have with AI, and if we don't crack it, we're going to have worker resistance. You saw the strike in the US at Hollywood of writers and scenarists saying that we don't want this and we don't want to be replaced by AI, and negotiating on this. And I think one way to address it, we of course need negotiations and to involve the unions and things like this, but we need to have major programs of skilling, training, reskilling, and experimentation. We need to let people play with AI, and in a context of a particular use case, we need to make sure that if it's within the company, the potential users can be at the table and start playing with what it would mean if it's something for consumers to have test groups that participate in the development, and not let it be something that's just driven by very smart engineers, but just engineers who will develop what they think is great.
Nicolas?
Let me try and address your question. It's a tough one. It's a very important one. What I said before, in my view, the fight for gender equality was the mother of all battles, is because that's where we have a common ground over what we mean by how trustworthy AI, particularly the data science and data engineering part of it, translates into the results and the outcome that we want, the discrimination that we want on talent, on outcome, on competence, not on the other things. And it's been historically more difficult to do it in an intersectional way, particularly in my home country, France, because of the way and the approach we have to communitarism and secularism. And yet there are ways, and you worked, the Fondation Aviona, and I helped however I could, and Institut Montaigne worked on a very interesting table-setting exercise to try and coin and frame what could be a French approach to affirmative action. Because we know that if we don't collect data of a certain cultural and ethnical way, there is no way we can debias those black boxes. There is no way. We can do it with gender-based data because we are obliged by law to collect those data, but paradoxically, if not otherwise, we are forbidden from collecting them for other things because of our system and the fact that the Republic recognizes only one thing, which is the French people, which might be, from that perspective, a bit outdated. But why we, the French, refuse to cross the line is also because we are afraid of how the Americans and the American model of the so-called salad bowl has translated. And the fact that we do not necessarily, and I don't speak for anyone but myself, we don't necessarily, but I can feel the soul of my country a bit agitated by the fear of being boxed by either a color, as it is often the time, the color of the skin in the US. So finding a right approach, or religion, exactly, finding the right approach has been tough. But as a result, I'm sorry to say that we have stalled, that we have not made any progress. And the report that you had co-published was extremely courageous vis-a-vis that. That's one of the toughest questions where I don't think my country is at the rendezvous of history, unlike for abortion.
Thank you, Gabriela. On the rest of, we call them the rest of the world, actually, the world minus the EU and the US, let's say.
Well, I think the rest of the world is completely underrepresented in these technologies. And what we got from the Global Forum, where we had this fantastic participation from every corner of the world, is it was very interesting because it was not just I want to be able to use these technologies and adopt these technologies. It was I want to develop my own technologies. And I think this is super important because we're talking about now gender issues. But the fact is that if you are going to manage your health systems and you're going to go commercial for a platform, I think it's just putting yourself at great risk. But I think that for the questions that we had in this context, diversity matters. And I feel is not, yes, intersectorality and the data and all of the things are important. But I feel that what the recommendation puts a lot of emphasis, being, of course, the institution that is promoting cultural knowledge and intercultural knowledge, diversity is super important. And we know that data sets, technological developments, algorithms are not diverse. That's one of the issues that I think we can really tackle. How do we ensure diversity in the workforce? How do we ensure diversity in the data sets? How do we ensure diversity in the outcomes? And I feel this is not as complex as it looks, because at the end, what is very important is that we have the tools. Governments have the tools. They have the investment tools. They have the incentives. They have the frameworks. They have the tax. They have these tools, the procurement, to ensure that companies take those issues into account. And let me tell you something that I feel is the more complex issue. We are always talking about how do we avoid these risks? How do we avoid exacerbating gender equality? The fact is that for me, being a policy wonk, is about shaping the markets. It's not that you let the sector do whatever they want. It's about how do I create the incentives, for example, to have more investments, technological investments for applications or developments that will help people with disabilities to thrive. You give subsidies, there are so many tools. President Biden launched this amazing package that is the Inflation Reduction Act, as we know, has nothing to do with the Inflation Reduction Act only. But all of the incentives that he put for climate transition generated a massive movement. And therefore, I feel that we should also be thinking in the very same economic lenses that we look at different sectors. How do we shape this sector to produce more investments in those kind of technologies that we need, in addressing gender needs, for example? And how do we ensure that it's not decided just by the group of big tech that knows how to use this for profit making? So these are the kind of issues that I would say, and this is not an easy answer. Because of course this is a profit-making machine, because there are lots of geopolitical competition issues, and therefore not many times the decision to advance technological developments are made based on what we're discussing here. They're based in something else, and in the context of war, in the context of conflict, is more worrisome.
Thank you. There was, you had a question? Yeah. There we go.
I'm actually really interested in the region of Latin America, and because recently I've been reading some articles regarding AI automation in the mining sector, and I know that Latin America is a region where, well, we know the lithium triangle, and the fact that now with a green transition more than ever, I think the mining sector will probably skyrocket. So I was wondering, what are the implications for the disenfranchised, for women in particular, because we're talking about gender, because I know that women are at the forefront of fighting against these big corporations on the ground, and also indigenous groups, but there's, so again, the issue of intersectionality comes up. So my question is, how do we deal with that? Yeah. It's a big question, so I don't know if it can be answered in this short time span, but that's my question.
Thank you. I don't know if there is any additional one. No? All right. So the mining sector, and then in Latin America, and then I'll ask you a final. We'll end with a final, very short from each one of you.
I actually are. I'm not an expert on the mining sector, but let me tell you that I was really interested that from all the regions of the world in which we work, including Europe, because we're working with DG Reform to look at the kind of institutions that would be necessary to implement the AI Acts. The region that was more committed to the implementation of the recommendation was Latin America. That was very interesting. Chile, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Uruguay, Costa Rica, Paraguay, they all came first to say, I want to have the readiness assessment. I need to know where do I stand in terms of my capacities, infrastructure, and all I have said. And this was led by a fantastic woman, which is the Minister of Science of Chile, who then called on all the countries that were doing the readiness assessment to sit together, and they put a lot of emphasis on the question of gender, which means that emerging economies, interestingly enough, may have a better positioning because they are not still trapped on the power games that you mentioned, and they might have a little bit more capacities and governance capacities, because it's a question of governance to do so. But then you come from very far behind. For example, when we finished the diagnostic to Chile to see how far they are in terms of producing and being a player in this world, they have to review their privacy laws. I mean, just go back to basics. But at the end, I feel that these countries, for me, was a real surprise and looks good, notwithstanding the fact that we, as all the regions in the world, are facing this wave of populist governments that sometimes are not really taking the decisions we consider they should be taking. No?
So we are going to end with a very short question to each one of the panelists. We have this podcast series called What Keeps You Up at Night? So I want to ask you, what keeps you up at night on artificial intelligence and gender equality? Anne.
Always get to answer these questions first. Thank you. Gives me lots of time to think. What keeps me awake at night? I think it's the pace. I think it's one of the fastest. Of course, there's been revolutions before. Humanity has thrived through a number of revolutions and transformations and changes. But if we remember that when OpenAI launched ChatGPT in November 2022, I think it took them 5 days or a very, very short amount of time to get to their first million users and then 100 million users. That's faster than Instagram, than TikTok, than Facebook, than all the previous things that we thought were really, really fast before. So I think the pace, it goes faster than governance, than democracy, than processes in companies, than all the things we're used to working with. So that pace means that we need to react very quickly and not catch up, but try to stay ahead if we can.
Nicolas.
The fate of my 8, soon-to-be 9-year-old daughter, as a matter of fact, I was this morning in a class upon the invitation of her teacher to brief this class of CE2 around what is artificial intelligence and to discuss with the teacher how to engage meaningfully with ChatGPT, because they have to engage with ChatGPT, with these models. And it so happens, so education, in other words, it so happens that, and I think it's a blessing in disguise, that the generative AI revolution hit first the world of education, took it by storm. I think because it's exactly where we needed the revolution to begin, the governance revolution to begin, capacity building revolution to begin. And so they were taken by storm, everyone was lost, and everyone is still lost, to be honest, and that's okay, because it's where it has to begin. So that's what keeps me awake. Well, personally, my daughter and the field of education.
Thank you. I think it speaks a lot to this place. And I mean, how we're grappling with it from the students that are probably further advanced in using it than those of us who have to be in the business of governing it, quote unquote. Gabriela.
I would say that really, really what keeps me awake at night is not being able to influence these developments at the pace that we need to do it. And then in 1 decade, 5 years from here, we will see the negative impact that all of us that have been fighting for gender equality is having if we don't shape these technologies right. There's lots of stake. And I don't think that we are being fast enough and decisive enough to ensure that we avoid an unequal outcome world. But not to finish in a very pessimistic mode, I think that we have the tools, we have the will, and we have the agency. So let's just do it.
Thank you. Let's end here on this positive note. Thank you to the panelists. I think we leave this room wiser than when we came in, and this is the whole purpose of this conferences. Thank you also to the Paris Peace Forum for joining in with PSIA and Sciences Po, and thank you to all of you for being with us. Give yourselves a big applause.